I was halfway through a cup of instant coffee, the bitter taste still clinging to my tongue, when my phone buzzed on the countertop. I glanced at the screen. Tyler. He never called unless he needed something. I picked up with a sigh. "Hey, man." Tyler's voice crackled through the speaker. "I need a favor." I leaned back against the kitchen counter, the chipped edge digging into my back. "Of course you do," I replied, setting the cup down. "What is it this time?" "It's my uncle's car," he said. "Thing's been coughing and sputtering like it's about to die. I told him you're a genius with cars, and he's willing to pay for the trouble." I rubbed my eyes, considering it. My part-time job at the auto shop barely covered rent, and I'd been eyeing a few repairs for my own junker. Extra cash wouldn't hurt. "How much is he paying?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Enough," Tyler chuckled. "He's good for it. Bit of an oddball, but harmless. You free today?" I glanced around my tiny apartment, stacked dishes, laundry I'd been ignoring for a week, textbooks spread across the floor. Nothing here was going anywhere. "Yeah, I can head over now. Send me the address." "You're a lifesaver," Tyler replied, relief evident in his voice. "I'll text you the details. And, hey, don't be surprised if he's a little weird. He's always been the stay-off-my-lawn kind of guy," I chuckled. "I can handle weird. See you later." The call ended, and a minute later, my phone buzzed with the address. I grabbed my keys off the hook by the door, slipped into my worn leather jacket, and headed down the creaking stairs of my apartment complex. The drive wasn't long, just enough to finish the rest of my cold coffee and let my mind wander. I imagined the guy. Tyler's description painting a picture of a grumpy old man, maybe in his 70s, rocking back and forth on a splintered porch swing, complaining about kids, on his lawn. The type who wore suspenders and still read the morning paper. But as I pulled into the driveway, my expectations shattered. The house was nice. Really nice. Clean white siding, freshly painted shutters, and a perfectly manicured lawn. A classic Mustang sat parked in the driveway, its surface gleaming under the midday sun. Not exactly what I pictured for a guy described as an oddball. I climbed out of my car, adjusting my jacket and running a hand through my hair, suddenly conscious of the grease stains on my hands. I stepped up to the door and knocked, half expecting a scowl and a grumbled, "What do you want?" Instead, the door swung open, and I was greeted by a man who was definitely not in his 70s. He stood there, mid-40s at most, with broad shoulders and a jawline that looked like it could cut glass. He wore a fitted white t-shirt that hugged his frame, his sleeves rolled up just enough to reveal muscled forearms. His eyes, sharp and ocean blue, looked me up and down with a flicker of curiosity. "You're Tyler's friend?" he asked, his voice smooth and steady. "Yeah, I'm here for the car," I managed to say, catching myself before I stared too long. He stepped back, gesturing me inside with a nod. "Well, come on in. I've got everything set up in the garage. I'm Chris, by the way." "Nice to meet you," I replied, following him through the doorway, my heart inexplicably picking up its pace. As he led me down the hallway, I couldn't help but think, Tyler really undersold this guy. Chris led me through the hallway, his footsteps sure and unhurried. The place was spotless. Polished wood floors, neatly stacked bookshelves, and framed photographs that told stories of family barbecues and beach trips. It felt warm, lived in. Not at all what I expected from someone Tyler described as a bit odd. As we stepped out onto the driveway, I couldn't help but glance back at the house. It looked like something out of a lifestyle magazine. The lawn perfectly trimmed, flowers lining the walkway in neat rows. I shook my head slightly. Tyler clearly had an odd definition of weird. Chris unlocked the side door to the garage and pushed it open, the heavy metal creaking slightly as it swung inward. The smell of motor oil and old leather rushed out to greet us, a smell I'd grown used to during my hours working at the auto shop. "There she is," Chris said, nodding towards a classic 1967 Mustang fastback. It was painted a deep midnight blue, its chrome trim polished to a mirror finish. My eyes widened as I stepped forward, running my hand gently along the hood. "Wow," I breathed out, barely realizing I'd spoken aloud. "This is pristine." Chris chuckled, the sound rich and genuine. I try to keep her that way. Had her since my 20s. Needs a bit of work now, though. Been having some trouble starting her up, and the engine's been making a sound. I don't like. I glanced back at him, surprised. You've had this since your 20s. He shrugged, crossing his arms over his chest, the muscles in his forearms flexing slightly. I age well, he replied, a hint of a smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. I forced a laugh, nodding as I opened the hood, doing my best to focus on the job. But it wasn't easy. Chris had a presence, an aura of confidence that filled the space between us. He didn't just look at you. He studied you, as if searching for the parts that didn't quite fit. So, he began, leaning casually against the workbench, his eyes still on me. Tyler says you're the best with cars. I shrugged, pulling out my tools from the duffel bag I'd brought. I get by. Been working on them since high school. I focused on the engine, grateful for the excuse to break eye contact. Chris moved closer, just enough that I could feel the warmth of his body behind me. He leaned in, looking over my shoulder. Mind if I watch? I hesitated, glancing back at him. He was close, closer than most people would stand in this situation. But his expression was relaxed, eyes fixed on the engine. I forced a nod. Sure, no problem. I started with the basics, checking the spark plugs, the wiring, the fluids. Chris watched silently, occasionally nodding as if he understood what I was doing. But every now and then, I'd feel his shoulder brush against mine, just lightly, like a whisper of contact. At first, I chalked it up to the small space. The garage was packed with toolboxes, spare parts, and a workbench that took up most of the back wall. But as the minutes ticked by, I realized he wasn't moving away. In fact, he was edging closer, leaning in under the pretense of examining the engine. You always this hands-on with your cars? I asked, trying to sound casual. My heart was doing this ridiculous fluttering thing I couldn't quite control. Chris chuckled low and smooth. Only when there's something interesting under the hood. My hand stilled on the wrench, and I glanced up. His eyes met mine, steady, unflinching. He didn't look away, didn't flinch like he'd misspoken. He just stared. I swallowed hard, dropping my gaze back to the engine. Well, you're in luck. This is definitely interesting. He laughed again, stepping back just a little, but not before his hand brushed my shoulder, lingering for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. I'll grab us some water. Be right back. I exhaled sharply as he disappeared into the house, my hands gripping the edge of the car for support. What the hell was that? I shook my head, forcing myself to focus. I was here to fix his car, nothing more. Whatever tension I was feeling, whatever heat had sparked between us, it was just in my head. Had to be. But as I stood there, hands still pressed against the cool metal of the Mustang, I couldn't help but replay that look in his eyes, the one that felt like it saw right through me, and I knew, deep down, I wanted to see it again. The garage door groaned as Chris pulled it down halfway, sunlight filtering through the slats and casting striped shadows across the floor. He set 2 cold bottles of water on the workbench, nodding toward one. Figured you could use it, he said, cracking his open with a hiss. Thanks, I replied, twisting the cap off mine. The cold liquid was a welcome relief from the heat creeping up my neck, though I wasn't sure if that was from the weather or something else entirely. Chris leaned against the tool chest, taking slow sips, watching me with that same steady gaze as I worked. I popped the hood back up, exposing the Mustang's guts, and began my inspection. I ran my hands over the cables and hoses, checking for cracks or leaks. My fingers brushed over the distributor cap, noting the faint line of corrosion. Looks like you might need a new distributor, I muttered, mostly to myself. Chris stepped closer, setting his water down and leaning over the engine beside me. His shoulder brushed mine, firm and unyielding. I tensed for a moment, but he didn't seem to notice. Or if he did, he didn't let on. So, he started, voice low and conversational. You've been working on cars long? I nodded, keeping my eyes on the engine. Yeah. Since I was a kid, really. My dad had a thing for old muscle cars. Used to spend weekends fixing them up. Chris smiled, nodding along. Guess it stuck, huh? Yeah, I guess so. He reached out, his hand grazing mine as he passed me a ratchet. His fingers were rough but warm, lingering for just a second longer than necessary. I glanced up, but he was already back to watching. The engine. I shook off the feeling and got back to work, tightening bolts and testing connections. "What about school?" Chris asked, still leaning close enough that his breath stirred the air between us. I wiped a streak of oil from my hand, onto my jeans. "College, engineering major, hoping to land something decent when I'm done. But for now, part-time gigs keep the lights on." He nodded approvingly. "Smart move. Gotta have a backup plan. I respect that." I found myself smiling, which was odd. Usually I kept conversations short, to the point. But with Chris, it was easy. Like he knew how to pull the right strings without even trying. "So, how do you know Tyler?" I asked, tightening a bolt. He chuckled, leaning back against the workbench. "His mom's my sister. I helped raise the kid when she got busy with work. He practically lived here during summers." I looked up, surprised. "You? Babysitting?" Chris shrugged, that familiar smirk returning. "I'm not as scary as I look." I raised an eyebrow, chuckling. "I never said you looked scary." He leaned forward again, his face just inches from mine. "Didn't have to." My throat went dry, and I turned back to the engine, fumbling with the next bolt. The silence stretched. Not uncomfortable, just charged. Chris didn't move away, and I became acutely aware of his presence, his gaze lingering on me, the occasional brush of his arm as he handed me tools, each one deliberate, fingers grazing. Mine, eyes locked just a second too long. "So," Chris continued, his voice softer now, almost a whisper. "You seeing anyone?" The question caught me off guard, and I nearly dropped the wrench. I cleared my throat, shaking my head. No, not really." He didn't respond right away, just hummed thoughtfully. "Shame," he said finally. "A guy like you? Bet. You don't stay single long." My face grew hot, and I laughed awkwardly, reaching for the water bottle to distract myself. "I guess I just keep busy." Chris stepped closer, his arm brushing against mine again. "Yeah, I get that, but it's important to make time for things that matter." I swallowed hard, nodding slowly. "Yeah, I guess you're right." I focused back on the engine, double-checking the connections. The tension in the air grew thicker, harder to ignore. Every time I leaned forward, I could feel him just behind me, his gaze trailing over my shoulders, my back. It was ridiculous, the way my heart was pounding, the way my hands shook just a little every time he spoke. "So, you think you can fix her?" Chris asked, his voice snapping me back to reality. I turned, nodding. "Yeah, just need to replace the distributor. I can pick up a part and have it swapped out in no time." He smiled, his eyes softening. "Appreciate it. I knew Tyler had good taste in friends." I chuckled nervously, closing the hood with a soft thud. "Yeah, well, guess I owe him one." Chris stepped back, crossing his arms. "Maybe I'll owe you one after this." His eyes didn't waver, holding mine for a beat longer than felt safe. My mouth went dry, and I cleared my throat. "I'll, go grab the part. Shouldn't take long." "Take your time," Chris said, his voice low and steady. "I'm not going anywhere." I turned away, heading for my car, the cool breeze outside barely enough to cool the heat creeping up my neck. I climbed into the driver's seat, exhaling sharply. What the hell was I getting myself into? The afternoon sun had dipped low by the time I finished swapping out the distributor and double-checking the connections. I wiped the sweat from my brow, stepping back to admire the Mustang's engine, now purring smoothly, no stuttering, no coughing, just a clean, low rumble that felt like victory. Chris stepped up beside me, his hands on his hips as he watched the engine idle. He nodded approvingly. "Damn, I gotta admit, you know your stuff." I couldn't help but smile. "Yeah, well, it wasn't too bad, just some corrosion in old parts. She's good to go now." He reached out, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "I appreciate it, really. Let me grab you something for the trouble." He turned toward the door, waving me to follow. "Come on inside, I'll get you your payment." I hesitated, glancing at the fading sunlight, and then back at him. "Oh, that's all right. I can wait out here." He raised an eyebrow, pausing in the doorway. You're seriously gonna make me drink a cold beer alone? Least I can do for your hard work. The offer lingered between us, and for a moment I considered just heading back to my car, waving off the invitation. But his eyes were steady, patient, and the way he leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed casually, made it hard to say no. All right, I said finally, wiping my hands on a rag. One drink. He grinned, holding the door open as I stepped inside. The cool air hit me first, a welcome contrast to the stuffy garage. He led me down the hallway, through the pristine living room I'd only glimpsed earlier. It looked even more perfect up close. Soft leather couches, clean hardwood floors, and a scent of cedar lingering in the air. Chris disappeared into the kitchen, the sound of clinking bottles following. I wandered to the large bay window overlooking the lawn, the evening sun casting long shadows across the grass. The place felt warm, lived in. Not the kind of house I'd expected someone like him to have. Here, he said, returning with 2 cold beers. He held one out to me, his eyes catching mine. To good work. I took the bottle, the cold glass slick with condensation. To good work, I echoed, clinking it against his. We both took long pulls, the silence stretching comfortably. Chris set his bottle down, nodding toward the living room. Mind sitting? Been on my feet all day. I followed him, settling onto the leather couch, the cushions soft and inviting. Chris dropped into the seat across from me, stretching out like he owned the place. Which, I guess he did. So, he began, taking another swig of his beer. Tyler mentioned you're good with cars. Didn't mention you were half my age. I laughed, setting my bottle on the coffee table. Didn't think it was relevant? He leaned back, arms draped across the top of the couch, eyes sharp and observant. Fair enough. You been doing this long? Since high school, I replied, finding it oddly easy to talk. My dad used to drag me out to the garage every Saturday. Hated it at first, but I shrugged. I guess it grew on me. Chris nodded thoughtfully. Not many kids your age stick with something that long. Gotta respect that. I sipped my beer, feeling a warmth spread through my chest, though I wasn't sure if it was from the alcohol or the way he was looking at me. His gaze was steady, unyielding, like he was peeling back layers with each passing second. So what about you? I asked, hoping to shift the focus. What do you do? He chuckled, running a hand through his hair. A bit of this, bit of that. Mostly consulting now. Used to do construction. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Not as exciting as fixing cars, but it pays the bills. We fell into an easy rhythm after that. Him sharing stories about working on high-rises, traveling the country, the kind of freedom I hadn't even considered yet. He spoke with his hands, animated and full of life, his eyes bright with nostalgia, and I found myself hanging on every word, laughing when he laughed, nodding along as if I'd known him for years instead of just a few hours. I was halfway through my second beer when the conversation slowed, the air growing heavier, thicker. Chris set his bottle down, his eyes never leaving mine. You know, it's been a long time since I've had company over. I swallowed, my hands suddenly clammy against the bottle. Oh, yeah? He nodded, his gaze flicking down to my hands, then back up. Not much reason to, I guess. Tyler used to come by all the time, but he's busy now. House gets real quiet. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, he leaned forward, his hand resting on my thigh, gentle but firm. My breath caught in my throat. The room suddenly, far too warm. His eyes searched mine, waiting, watching. It wasn't aggressive, wasn't forceful, just a touch, a suggestion. My heart hammered in my chest, but I didn't move. You all right? He asked, his voice softer now, almost a whisper. I nodded slowly, my gaze locked with his. Yeah, I'm good. His hand stayed there, warm and steady, fingers just barely pressing into the denim. He smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. Good. We sat like that for what felt like an eternity. The silence stretching, bending, but never breaking. And for the first time since I'd stepped through that door, I didn't feel the need to fill it. The room felt smaller, like the Walls had crept in a few inches while I wasn't looking. My heart pounded, loud and insistent, drowning out everything else. Chris's hand still rested on my thigh, his fingers just barely pressing into the denim, grounding me and setting me on edge all at once. He didn't move right away, didn't rush. His thumb traced light, slow circles against my leg, his eyes steady and unyielding. I couldn't look away. His gaze pinned me to the spot, my breath coming faster, chest rising and falling in shallow bursts. "You all right?" he asked again, voice low, rough around the edges. I swallowed, the room feeling warmer by the second. "Yeah, I'm good." A small smile tugged at the corners of his mouth, and for a moment I wondered if he could hear my heartbeat. Or if it was just me, trapped in this moment, unable to move. He leaned back slightly, his hand sliding away, and I felt the loss like a cold draft. But then he reached up, brushing his fingertips along my jaw, his thumb grazing the edge of my cheek. I didn't flinch, I didn't move. Hell, I barely breathed. His eyes searched mine, looking for something. Permission, maybe. Or maybe just the same desperation I was trying so hard to hide. "Can I?" he whispered, the words drifting between us, fragile and careful. I nodded, just once, barely more than a dip of my chin. But it was enough. Chris leaned in, his movements slow and deliberate, giving me every chance to change my mind. But I didn't. His hand slid to the back of my neck, pulling me forward until his mouth brushed mine. Soft at first, testing the waters, like he was waiting for me to pull away. I didn't. His lips were warm, firm, and when I didn't resist, he pressed harder, his other hand coming to rest on my shoulder, pulling me closer. The kiss deepened, slow and searching, and I found myself responding instinctively, my hands moving to his chest, fingertips grazing the fabric of his shirt. The sound he made, low and throaty, was enough to break whatever restraint I had left. I leaned into him, our mouths moving in sync, the tension from earlier snapping into something stronger, something real. I wasn't sure who moved first, but somehow we ended up standing, his hands at my waist, mine gripping his shoulders. The room blurred around us, all peripheral noise and space fading into nothing. All that existed was him, his touch, his breath, his presence consuming mine. "Come with me," he murmured, his lips brushing my ear, sending a shiver down my spine. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and he led me toward the hallway, his hands slipping down to clasp mine. His grip was warm, sure, and I followed without hesitation, our footsteps soft against the hardwood floors. The hallway stretched before us, dimly lit by the evening sun filtering through frosted glass. I caught glimpses of framed photos on the walls, Tyler as a kid, a woman I assumed was Chris's sister, family gatherings frozen in time. It was strangely intimate, walking through someone's life like this, hand in hand, my pulse thrumming with every step. He stopped outside a door near the end of the hall, turning to face me, his hands still in mine. His eyes held mine, searching, waiting. "You sure about this?" he asked, voice softer now, almost vulnerable. I didn't answer right away. Not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to remember the look in his eyes. The way his brow furrowed just slightly, like he was fighting to keep his composure. I squeezed his hand, stepping closer, closing the distance. "Yeah," I whispered, my voice steady, resolute. "I'm sure." The tension between us, the thing that had been simmering since the moment I knocked on his door, finally broke. His hand slid to the back of my neck again, his fingers threading through my hair as he pulled me closer, our mouths colliding with a new urgency. It was different this time, deeper, more desperate. His hands moved to my waist, pulling me flush. Against him, the hallway walls echoing the soft sounds of our movements. I felt his fingertips trace circles along my back, grounding me, holding me steady. There was no rush, no sense of urgency, just the steady, deliberate way he touched me, like he was memorizing every detail. I matched his movements, my hands, roaming across his shoulders, his back, feeling the heat radiating through his shirt. He pulled back just enough to look me in the eyes, his breath coming in short bursts. "I've been waiting for this," he admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah?" I replied, my hands still on his chest, feeling his heartbeat beneath my palms. He nodded, his gaze dropping to my mouth. You have no idea. My heart skipped, and I leaned forward, closing the gap between us once more. His hands found my waist, pulling me against him as our lips met, slow and deliberate, building in intensity with every passing second. The hallway was silent except for the soft rustle of fabric, the creak of the floorboards under our feet. The rest of the world fell away, leaving just us. An unspoken understanding, a connection I hadn't known I wanted until I'd walked through his door. I pulled back, just slightly, my eyes meeting his. I'm here now, I whispered. He smiled, that same slow, confident grin I'd come to recognize. His hand squeezed mine gently. Yeah, you are. We stood there for a moment, neither of us moving, the silence stretching out comfortably. I didn't know what came next, didn't need to. All I knew was that I didn't want it to end. Not yet. I woke up to the soft glow of morning light filtering through the curtains, casting pale streaks across the ceiling. For a moment, I didn't move. Eyes fixed on the lines of light, mind slowly piecing together where I was. Chris's house, his guest room by the looks of it. I sat up slowly, the sheets slipping off my shoulders. My clothes were folded neatly on the chair by the window, and there was a glass of water and a note resting on the nightstand. Good morning. Coffee's on. I couldn't help but smile, brushing my hands through my hair before slipping out of bed and getting dressed. The house was quiet as I made my way down the hallway, the smell of fresh coffee growing stronger with every step. Chris was in the kitchen, leaning against the counter with a mug in one hand and a newspaper in the other. He glanced up as I entered, his eyes lighting up with a smile. Morning? Morning, I replied, my voice a little rough from sleep. I rubbed the back of my neck, feeling a bit of awkwardness settle in, but Chris didn't seem fazed. He just nodded toward the coffee pot. Help yourself. Mugs are in the cabinet. I grabbed one, pouring the dark liquid and taking a long sip, letting the warmth settle into my chest. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was comfortable, easy. He went back to his paper, occasionally sipping his coffee, and I leaned against the counter, savoring the quiet. So, he said finally, folding the paper and setting it aside. The car's running like a dream, I chuckled, nodding. Glad to hear it. He raised his mug in a mock toast. You really know your stuff. I appreciate it. I shrugged, feeling a flush creep up my neck. Just doing my job. His eyes sparkled with something unspoken. Well, you do it well. We finished our coffee in silence, the only sound the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. Eventually, I set my mug down and rubbed my hands together. I should probably head out. Got classes later. Chris pushed off the counter, nodding. Of course. Let me get you sorted. He led me to the front door, the morning sun casting long shadows across the porch. My car sat parked in the driveway, the Mustang gleaming beside it. I turned back to him, expecting a simple handshake, maybe a wave goodbye. But Chris reached into his back pocket and pulled out an envelope, pressing it into my hand. For the work, he said, his voice soft. And then some. I glanced down, feeling the weight of it, more than I'd expected. I started to protest, but he held up a hand. You earned it. Thanks, I said, the word feeling too small for what I wanted to convey. He smiled, eyes crinkling at the corners. Hold on. I watched as he pulled out a small slip of paper, scribbling something on it before folding it in half. He stepped forward, slipping it into my palm, his hand lingering just a second longer than necessary. His voice dropped, soft and almost conspiratorial. In case you ever need anything else. Our eyes met, and I felt my heart stutter, heat rising to my cheeks. I'll keep that in mind. His smile widened, and for a moment, I thought he might lean in, might close the gap between us right there on the porch. But instead, he stepped back, shoving his hands into his pockets. Drive safe. I nodded, retreating to my car, my hand still wrapped around the piece of paper like it might disappear if I let go. I climbed into the driver's seat. The door, shutting with a solid thunk. Through the windshield, I watched Chris standing on the porch, hands still in his pockets, watching me with that same soft smile. I fired up the engine, giving him a small wave as I pulled out of the driveway. I didn't unfold the paper until I was halfway down the road, the tension in my chest finally loosening enough for me to breathe. His number was written in clean, bold handwriting, along with a simple message: "Anytime. Chris." My heart thudded painfully, and I couldn't help the grin that spread across my face. I set the slip of paper carefully on the dashboard, my fingers drumming against the steering wheel. As I drove back toward town, replaying every moment in my mind, somehow I knew I'd be back, and I couldn't wait.